We're taking a serious hit with Airbnbs. Airbnbs are taking over this whole neighborhood.
From one storm to another, Treme residents say their neighborhood has been taken over by out-of-town visitors, and they are angry and fed up. In part 2 of our Treme series, we saw how Treme residents were in a war with the city as they watched their historic homes be demolished thanks to urban renewal projects.
Hurricane Katrina then opened the community to a new wave of issues. Now there was a renewed interest in the city's historic neighborhoods, and Treme was a prime target for newcomers and investors.
In the final installment of my series, we explore how short-term rentals led to a final wave of displacement for those living in Treme, thanks to a lack of affordable housing.
As put on display in the previous video, gentrification is the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, and attracting new businesses, while typically displacing current inhabitants in the process. Explained by the CDC, displacement happens when longtime or original neighborhood residents move out of a gentrified area because of higher rents, mortgages, and property taxes. Gentrification in New Orleans has been encouraged and instigated by segregated housing projects in the 1900s. In 1940, the Housing Authority of New Orleans created the black projects named Lafitte and the white projects called Iberville. As suburban living popularized during and after World War II, white families were able to move out of urban areas as they found consistent jobs more easily than black families. White flight came to New Orleans in the 1960s. With the Civil Rights Act in 1964, black families were allowed to live in Iberville as well, which made the projects almost 100% black. In 2008, New Orleans public housing was 95% black. While it was collectively known and planned that the housing projects needed to be cleaned up and modernized, no effort was acted on until after Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina further exacerbated New Orleans' vulnerability to gentrification. With lives lost and houses broken down and abandoned, government officials and those looking at the struggling condition of New Orleans decided to implement programs that would fight against blight and give builders the opportunity to remodel specific areas. After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans was labeled an opportunity zone for gentrification. An opportunity zone is an economic development tool that allows people to invest in distressed areas in the United States. In simple terms, opportunity zones highlight areas that will be financially beneficial for investors. Investors who decide to take part in opportunity zones are given tax benefits, as their presence means more funding is channeled into the zone to stimulate economic growth and job creation. Following Hurricane Katrina, Treme and the Lower Ninth Ward, which are prime examples that reveal the negative impacts of gentrification, were both targeted to be opportunity zones due to their decayed state and high rates of poverty and crime.
But then Katrina happens, right? The community starts slowly dying, and then Katrina just kind of finishes off. If you walk a 3-block stretch right here, you'll see 25 empty lots. You can look around the park and see how many empty lots there are. Those used to be families' homes, right? And so half the neighborhood has to leave, can't come back. All these homes that were in generation after generation are now gone. And so this park gets fixed, right? We get a new playground. I say we, but the community does. The park gets a new playground, and of course Habitat for Humanity, everyone else helps out. But then it's left alone, and it's left to dilapidate over the next 16 years. So right now what happened with this park is what you're seeing is a bathroom that can't be used. You're seeing, a rickety basketball court. You're seeing an unsafe park is what you're seeing. And so the community doesn't feel safe to come here. The lights don't come on at night. So when you don't have a park for the community to come to, then how can you have a community, right?
Along with restricted access to healthcare, food, transportation, and education as a result of displacement, Treme reveals how gentrification propels cultural erasure and the loss of an area's history.
What New Orleans is going to end up doing is losing its culture that it's praised for. And they're going to wonder where it went. And it went with all the black people that left here. Because all the people who are coming here, true, they can partake in it, but they don't know how to carry it on. That's just something we know. New Orleans is going to wake up one day and really be like, there are no second lines outside. What happened? And it's going to be because of all this bullshit that they've muddled on a community that loves this place. Like, my grandmother would never leave. My grandmother literally grew up in a 2-block radius her whole life until she moved to Philly. And then she's been there since after Betsy. She's never going to leave New Orleans. And I know she's getting up in age, but that's the type of people who've raised us to never leave. But if the opportunities aren't available for my generation, we will. Mm-hmm. And then there's going to be issues.
Additionally, the Lower Ninth Ward's experience with gentrification exposes the corrupt, ignorant, or exploitative measures politicians and businesses employ to invite investors into an area. In 2010, Mayor Mitch Landrieu imitated the practices of other cities that have had similar blight issues and created, quote, special phone hotlines for reporting blight, a database to track the status of every blighted property, laws that allow the city to enforce blight codes with lightning speed, and the ability to target specific neighborhoods that, while not exactly jewels before Katrina, were teetering on the brink of collapse because added blight brought more crime and instability, end quote. In the fall of that same year, 2010, the program had already cleared 10,000 of the city's 44,000 reported blighted properties. While Treme has already seen the overturning of land to Airbnbs and the pricing of housing skyrocket, the Ninth Ward is also on its way, as it is being deprived in order so that it can be remodeled for economic purposes. Given tax incentive and the legal means to do so, houses are being seized from owners under the claim that the city is fighting against blight. A Ninth Ward resident interviewed in New Orleans, Adrian, shared his experience of having to fight to keep ownership over his house. Living in the Holy Cross subdistrict and that of the Ninth Ward, developers wanted to build up a new school in the area. To do so, they intended to buy out the whole block. With pushback from residents asserting the ownership over their homes, developers reported every small instance of blight on those living on the land that they wanted. Examples of these reports could be an unkept roof, unstable door, or whatever else. One reported a resident would build up liens and code enforcement fines. In the years of rebuilding his mother's, grandmother's, and aunt's houses from Hurricane Katrina, Adrian left his house for last. In the 2 years that developers continued to report his house for blight, the city had given Adrian $25,000 in liens and $23,000 in code enforcement fines. If one is charged with enough liens, their property, after about 3 years, can be taken and given to another party who can take better care of it. Adrian, committed to keeping his house, paid $48,000 in total, while the overall project to fix his house would have only cost $10,000. All of his life savings are now depleted. He said that if the developers or the city attempt to pile up code enforcement fines against him again, he will be forced to surrender his house, as he does not have the financial means to stay. Although fighting against the physical decomposition of a neighborhood and attempting to lower its crime rates is praiseworthy, many of the officials and organizations redistributing homes to different property owners are ignorant to the reality of those living in these blighted neighborhoods. When one's method of restoring an area is built upon replacing the original population already living there with a new upper-class population, no real solutions were applied. The problems were simply just relocated or broken up and dispersed to other areas. Both Treme and the Lower Ninth Ward show how poverty, crime, and displacement are the result of funding going towards higher quality housing and schools while not supporting the residents, businesses, and ownership that are already there. Specifically, in the case of Treme and the Lower Ninth Ward, unsupported black businesses and black property ownership have not been preserved by the government presiding over the city, but rather have been neglected, criminalized, taken, and then given to the highest bidder. For residents, they are stuck in between a war between economics and their livelihood. Their home is being given to investors, businessmen, and tourism projects in order so that the city can produce more profit.
Are you actually seeing New Orleans natives moving into places like these?
Absolutely.
But that's not what we've heard. We visited one of Kabakov's mixed-income properties with Kevin. Kevin grew up in housing projects here before the city tore them down after Katrina. In fact, only a fraction of public housing residents were able to move into the new mixed-income developments like this one.
So you don't see the jobs coming along with the development?
No, not at all. Especially and not the jobs that are paying, because most of the jobs that are part of development are not going to residents. They're going to people that are coming in from out of town.
How does that make you feel that it took Katrina to then get this, to get pressure washed brick?
It makes you feel horrible. It makes you feel like you weren't worth the investment.
Housing advocates say the city didn't have a sufficient plan to help restore homes and keep housing accessible.
New Orleans is a city that contains a majority of renters. Because rents have increased so much, then lower income people no longer have access to the neighborhoods in which they've traditionally lived.
One can only imagine if Treme would have been allowed to develop parallel to that of the Marigny and Bywater. Just think of what could have happened for the folks who lived there back then. Maybe they would still be here. Maybe they would be in business. Maybe their sons and daughters and grandkids might not be in jail for a rock or a joint. One can only imagine